All right, welcome to the Reactivity Series Lab, Procedure A, Part 1. So step 1 is to record the water temperature in your data table on page 4. The water temperature here is 19.3 degrees Celsius. What we're going to do is we're going to take our 6 test tubes. You can see we've labeled each of the test tubes already with the metal that we're going to put in it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take one piece of metal for each test tube and place it in. So for copper, we're going to add one piece of copper into the test tube. Magnesium. Calcium. Iron. Aluminum. And there is already one piece of zinc in there, so we're going to leave zinc inside. Notice how when you're doing a lab, you do need to make sure that you close each of your containers afterwards so that anyone else who is using the metals knows which metal is which. So the next step is we're going to take our graduated cylinder and we're going to measure 5 milliliters of water and pour that into each test tube. Okay? As you pour it in, you're going to have a look to see if there's any immediate signs of reaction. So remember, we're looking for bubbles or change of color, gas being produced with the bubbles, or a new substance forming or anything like that. Temperature change, okay? We'll do the same thing for each test tube. And then we'll observe all of them to see if we have any reactions, okay? So there's the initial pour for magnesium. You can see there's not a lot happening. There's a little bit of black on the magnesium, but it was there before. There's just a few tiny, tiny, very small bubbles. So we're not going to say that that's necessarily a reaction yet. I'm going to do iron next. Okay. And if you have a look at the close-up, right now there's not really a whole lot that we can see. So we'll leave that to sit for a minute. And this one is aluminum. Okay. Again, if you're looking at the aluminum, there's not really anything going on. Okay. Zinc. Okay, there it is for zinc. So have a look to see if you can see if there's any bubbles or anything like that. Okay, to decide if there is a reaction. And the last one is calcium. All right, so we are going to pour it in for calcium. So you can see there are bubbles forming with the calcium. At the bottom, I know it's very difficult to actually see on the video, but there's quite a lot of bubbles coming out right away. There you go, see? So what this tells us is that calcium is reacting with the water. Okay? You need to decide which metals reacted and which ones didn't. So take a minute, pause the video, write down on your page, so you have your front page of your lab on page 2, you have a section that says metals that did react, metals that did not react. Okay, make sure you're filling in which one you think reacted and which one didn't. Before you fill this table in though, it's a good idea to go to page 4 and make sure you record any observations you might have noticed in the video. Okay? Once again, we'll pull up each of the metals for you. So on page 4, for each metal, you need to record if you see anything, any signs of chemical change, such as bubbles, change of color, or anything like that. Okay, so that one was copper. Got magnesium. I don't know if you can see it, but there are actually a few bubbles going there. Okay, so again, there are some bubbles forming. Okay, a continuous stream of them on the calcium.
Okay, now we are going to do the Reactivity Series Lab, Procedure A, Part 2. So what we're going to do for Procedure A, Part 2 is we are going to take all of the metals from Procedure A, Part 1 that did not react. So in this case, copper, iron, aluminum, and zinc. Magnesium had enough of a reaction with its bubbles, although it's very little, so we might actually put magnesium in the hot water as well. So in part 2, what we're going to do is we're going to take the metals that didn't really react, and we're going to put them in a hot water bath for 2 minutes. So we're going to take our beaker here, I'll leave it in the tray, a 400 milliliter beaker, and we're going to fill it approximately half full with hot water. We're going to take the temperature of the hot water, and remember you need to record this in your data table, which will be on page 5 still page 4 for this part, for part A. Okay, so we'll let the thermometer kind of reach its point. There we go. So the temperature of the water is 86.1 degrees Celsius. Okay, so record that in your data table. And then we're going to take our metals and we're going to place them in all together into the beaker. Now, placing them in, we can use our hands, but when we go to remove them, because the beaker is full of hot water, we're going to use the tongs. Okay? So using a stopwatch, we are going to time for 2 minutes, or rather a timer, I guess. We're going to time for 2 minutes and let these metals sit inside. So while we're doing that, we're basically going to be letting them heat up. So the idea is that they didn't react in the room temperature water, but what happens now if we have hot water? Instead of putting the metals directly into hot water, because that could be potentially quite dangerous, we are doing the water bath so that the water inside each test tube starts to heat up at a little bit slower rate. Okay, and the 2 minutes gives it enough time to heat up enough to see if there would be any reaction or not. Okay, when we are done and when we pull each of the metals out, you should be on page 4 to record the observations. Ooh, while we're doing that, we'll take one more look at calcium from before. You can see the water is actually getting a little bit murkier looking now. That's because there's so many bubbles, and what's happening is there's a new substance forming. I don't know if you just saw that small piece of calcium break off, but the new substance that's forming is in the water, and it's actually creating a different amount of clarity. There, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, timer. Stop. There we go. So we're going to pull each of our test tubes out of the water bath. Okay, we'll place it again over here so you can see if you can observe anything. Okay, what I notice is there's a few bubbles that are forming just on the outside, but that's not actually bubbles forming on the iron. So those ones are simply because of the change in temperature of the water. So the iron itself has kept the same color. There's no bubbles, there's no, well, I mean, I can smell and there is no change in odor. Okay, nothing to indicate that there would be a chemical change. So you need to record those observations in the data table. Okay, next one, copper. Same thing, in case you can't clearly see it, it looks pretty much exactly the same as when we first put it in. There are no bubbles, no change in color, and no outward signs of a chemical change. Next up is zinc. Zinc also does not really have anything going on. There's the bubbles in the test tube, but again, just like with with iron, that is because of heating the water up, not because of a chemical reaction. Magnesium next. All right. You'll notice that there are a lot more bubbles here, both on the outside of the test tube and on the magnesium itself. If you can't quite see it, the magnesium is reacting. It is starting to change color, and there are bubbles that are forming all around the magnesium, even if it's difficult for you to see. And last one is aluminum. Okay, there's a few bubbles on the aluminum itself, although not really enough to say that there might be a chemical change happening. Okay, so that'll be up to you to decide. If you think there's enough bubbles to put that there's a chemical change, then you can record that. There is no change in color though, so that would be an additional sign. When you are doing the lab itself, what you should do at this point is then start, once you've recorded all of your observations in your data tables, then you would need to clean up. The proper procedure for cleaning up in this situation is to take each of the beaker or each of the test tubes with the metals and to dump it into the waste beaker. Okay, so I'm going to bring the test tube tray over with all of my samples. And because the test tubes are still hot, I'm going to dump each one out. We're going to try and get the metal out. If the metal piece doesn't come out, we'll add a little bit of water afterwards to get it out.
So just make sure once you've finished everything, you've got all of your observations recorded. And then after you finish procedure B, you need to do the data analysis and the conclusion.